board already?
Yep.
Hey, oh. Go wake that guy up.
After we finish an introduction here, we're going to be... All right. Good morning and welcome to Bill Speidel's Underground Tour. I'm Joe, and it's my job in the next 15-20 minutes to make you experts in Seattle's history. Lucky for you, we're a youngster. It will only take 15-20 minutes to do that. And then we're going to divide you up into smaller, more intimate groups of, 40, 45, and take you out on the walking portion of the tour. With the introduction, you'll better understand how we created the underground, what you're seeing underground. And for the underground portion of the tour, I'm working with 3 wonderful guides today that we'll break you up with and split you into groups later. Let me introduce those guides now. We have Bruce. We have the lovely Jonelle, who just got her ankle bracelet off yesterday. She's pretty excited about that. And we have Christine. Now that you know a little bit about us, let's find out a little bit about you. Do we have anybody from out of town in the group today? Yeah? Lots of you, okay. Any Seattleites in the group? A historian, a columnist for the local newspaper, a real curmudgeon in this part of town. And he wanted, at the time, this neighborhood was derelict, abandoned, there was panhandlers, drunks wandering the sidewalks, so unlike today. And the buildings were abandoned, being torn down. Bill was alarmed that we were losing our history here in Pioneer Square, and he started the tour as a publicity stunt to save the neighborhood. He thought it might last one summer. We're here 41 years later, and Bill had a petition at the end of the tour to gather signatures to save the neighborhood. Thanks to Bill's efforts and the efforts of other preservationists in town, I'm proud to say we now stand in Seattle's first and largest National Historic District, protecting over 200 buildings left throughout Pioneer Square. A lot of the stories that we use on the tour all come from Bill's book. Bill was a writer, wrote a number of books, everything from local guides to restaurant guides and histories. And most of the stories from the tour come from one particular book called Sons of the Prophets. Now don't worry, it's not a religious text. It's spelled prophets, P-R-O-F-I-T-S. It was Bill's contention that Seattle's early founders came here to make money. If they could do so legally, great. If they could do so illegally, that was great. It didn't matter. And in fact, Bill's not afraid of making a buck either, because you'll find this book for sale in the gift shop at the end of the tour when we have you locked in underground. You'll find it's a very good seller because on the inside cover there's a lovely 2-page, 2-color map of how to get out of the underground. You notice they're in Seattle's official colors, gray and light gray. Where are you from? My memory of San Diego is the Marine Corps boot camp. I need to go back and do something fun. Maybe like the zoo or something. Well, here we are. Welcome. What do you think? Why did I pay for this? I could see this at home. Actually, the term underground is not very accurate. We just told you that to get you here. Probably a better term would be the ground. But who would pay to see that? So we call it the underground. If you could be standing here about 1891, you'd be very young. And also you would not be underground at all. Just imagine you're now on the first floor of an entire city of 33 square blocks. All the buildings, sidewalks, and streets all started down here. And we just build up all around all that to create this place we call the underground. And I'll explain how we did that and why. If I can. If you have questions about anything at any time, during the tour, even if they're very personal, just chime right in, let me know. If I don't know the answer, I'll make something up, kind of like school. Let me orient you to where you are. This is kind of why I wanted you over here by the bar, because you can see a sketch of the building that you're inside of right now. This is called the Corn Building. It was built in 1888, and it burned down in 1889, along with almost everything else, and it was reconstructed a second time.
but pretty much like you see it here. But if you look at this building today, this is what you would see above ground, with another floor up here on top, and the year would be a year later, 1889, and down here is where we are right now, the original first floor. This was once a general store. Apparently you couldn't buy anything specific. It was called Moses Korn's Mechanics Store, classy place in its day. You can see some clues. Notice the wooden columns holding up the ceiling around you. If you notice on the walls, there's a hint of a design that went all the way around the interior. Pretty classy place. The best example of that design in this building is right over there in the corner. And we're going to be walking right by that in just a moment. In fact, we're going to go out that door over there in the corner. And if you look at this sketch, it would correspond to this one right here in the corner. We're going to go out that door, walk down the outside of the building, down Skid Road or Yesler Way, go around the corner, and go south, down Occidental in that direction, looking at the buildings on the outside. How old are you? 7. There's a boy about a year older than you. He was messing around in his grandmother's attic. This was a few years ago, and he found something quite valuable. He found a little picture, a little photograph about 2 inches square, all faded and frayed, but it turned out to be Seattle's first panorama, first picture. And if you look over here, you can see the photograph all restored. This is downtown Seattle, taken right after the Civil War. In 1865, here we're looking north up First Avenue right here. Notice the muddy streets and the wooden sidewalks. You can see the evidence of a shoreline right here. That's okay. And right behind, and here's Pioneer Square, where we started the tour. And there's Starbucks.
Starbucks.
It's also there, and it's there, and it's there. Sinking ship garage is today. You'd also notice a building all by itself up here on the hill. That's the first building of the newly constructed University of Washington. There weren't any college students, though, within 300 miles. That didn't matter. The important thing was that we had a university. And when important people, would come to town from California, we'd want them impressed. So they went about hiring off-duty loggers to sit in the classrooms and pretend like they were studying.
Oh, man.
They still do that today. Although today we call them football scholarships. Unfortunately, that building was torn down in 1893. The only thing that survived that beautiful building are the 4 white columns in the front, and they have been moved to the present UW campus to the north. But what is on that spot today is the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, and that hotel still pays rent to the University of Washington for that property. Needless to say, it's a nice investment. Before we leave the building, let's revisit the crapper over here real quickly. It's a very important part of the tour. On our way out. Yes, ma'am.
Is this first picture after the fire?
Yes. We have very few pictures that are post-fire. This was taken right after the fire. You can see the trolley tracks are all bent from the intense heat. And these are insurance agents here.
Yeah.
Come on over. 1889. Come on over. Notice anything unusual about this crapper device? The seat's down. You notice it's up off the floor. They elevated these crappers on purpose to try to minimize the Mount St. Helens effect of sewage coming out the wrong way. As these crappers were installed out here to the west toward the water, they had to be elevated higher. Some of these crappers were up as high as 27 feet in the air. Gave us a whole different skyline. Whole new meaning to the term high on pot. Actually, did you know that the crappers arrived in Tacoma first before they came up here? Did you know that? But it wasn't until they got in Seattle that we put the hole in the seat. Here we go. There we go. Here's an underground spring.
Little rattler in there.
Hit by a car, the first thing you do is take your sticker off. I'm just kidding. Now, I'd like you to imagine yourself standing right where you are now. It shouldn't be too hard. But you're younger. I'd like you to go back to the fire, okay? The fire has just occurred. You're standing outside. You're standing on what used to be sidewalks, but remember, these were once wooden planks, and the fire came through and burned those up very efficiently. Now you could look up above and see sky. Remember, you're outside at the original level. Maybe a little smoke drifting by, a couple of GU-11s. That would be a gull. The buildings were behind you, but they're all gone. They all burned up in the fire. So imagine there are no more buildings, no more sidewalks, and the streets are still down here behind me, you know, very muddy. And the guys who were running this town got together after the fire and had an open air meeting. And they thought, you know, we can cry about all this stuff we lost in the fire, which was a lot, but this is Seattle. We look at the positives. Number one, no one was even hurt in this fire, incredibly. Number two, we had fricasseed about 1 million rats. And number three, we got rid of a whole lot of ticky-tacky town. 38 years of unplanned wooden construction. Hey, we'll call this urban renewal. Now we can build a town with a little planning. Is there anybody here from Indiana? I don't get many people from Indiana. I guess they just stay home a lot. But there was a guy, he was a civil engineer from Indiana back in those days. His name was Thompson. And he pointed to these Seattleites and said, hey, you guys here in Seattle, you want to be a big city someday? Maybe like New York on the West Coast? Well, you got a good start. There's a natural, protected, deep water harbor out here, and that's great. But the problem was Seattle didn't have the land, you know, to support a major city. We were essentially built on the beach, and now we had just burned the whole thing down. He said, here's what you do. You get some high pressure water generated by steam and aim those hoses up there to the hill to the east of us, and you can knock down a whole bunch of dirt. All we needed was 80 million cubic yards. If you have trouble visualizing how much dirt that is, just imagine about the amount of dirt that came out of the Panama Canal when they were digging it. There were a few houses up there. That was just a temporary inconvenience. We could wash down a whole chunk of that hill up there. That would make the hillside more habitable, a little less steep, and we could wash all that dirt down here and use it for landfill. We could extend our shoreline out into Puget Sound about 300 yards and build our city on top of dry land. And then we could flush our toilets in one direction. How exciting is that? Well, while all this excitement was going on, the building owners, you know, these guys who had lost all of their businesses in the fire, they're not going to go along with this plan. Do you know why they came here originally? To make as much money as they could in the shortest amount of time. They weren't here to move dirt around. So even before the embers had cooled in 1889, they went right back and began building their buildings right where they were before. And that's what you see behind you now. These buildings went up very quickly in 1889. These are the same buildings, remember, that you see upstairs. They just started one floor down. Here in this case, along Occidental, the Oriental Hotel and the Fry Meat Market right there. And then they put down non-combustible sidewalks, and that's what you're standing on right now. Just imagine 30 blocks of this. These walls were built by hand. They're over 4.5 feet thick. And they put one of these walls on both sides of the old street. You know where the curb was? Just look at this wall and think, giant curb. Okay? Walls are going up on both sides of the street, up in the air. And then they filled in between the two walls, you know, on top of the old street, with anything they could find. Dead horses, rowboats, dysfunctional families, Mariner bullpen. And then they finished off the final grade right up there in cobblestones, and voila! We have our newly regraded city. The only problem is that our sidewalks were still down here, some 8 to 35 feet below the streets up there. This was inconvenient. That's not the right word. There were people losing their lives simply by stepping off of the street onto the sidewalk. Most of them were drunks. We didn't need Alcoholics Anonymous. We had a one-step program. You know, the building owners are getting very angry. They're saying, hey, you city officials, do something. This is terrible. There are horses and people and wagons falling off the street onto the sidewalk in front of my business. And the city said, hey, we have a lot of dirt around here. Why don't we just fill all this in? You know, kind of like we did with the streets over here. We'll fill all this in with landfill, and then we can build our new sidewalks right up there, right above the old ones. And then people can walk on those without dying, and into newly chiseled out entrances at the second floor level of the buildings. And that made sense for about 5 minutes. The building owner stepped in again and said, no, wait a minute, this isn't going to work. If you fill all this in with landfill down here, we won't be able to have an underground tour. No, if you fill this in with dirt, terrible things happen to these buildings. These buildings were not designed initially for lateral pressure, sideways pressure, doors and windows would cave in, but more importantly, people would have trouble shopping. They were still shopping down here in the 1890s, and money was flowing into these businesses, so heaven forbid, we didn't want to mess around with business. So if you look up above at regular intervals, you'll see that they installed I-beams that go from the streets over to the fronts of the buildings. You can see all the way along here above you. And then they constructed brick archways between the beams. They used the arch because of its strength. You know, it's after the Roman Keystone Arch, strong means of construction, because eventually it had to hold up the new sidewalks. Now, they're still shopping down here after this was covered over for 8 years. This was our first covered shopping mall. We also needed a place for teenagers, you know, to hang out. So they had to see what they were doing, and at various locations, they put little pieces of glass in the new sidewalks up above, so natural light would shine down here so people could see what they were doing. Those are nice sandals. Are they comfortable?
Uh-huh.
Oh. Obviously,
I've got to do it.
obviously, we've lost these skylights. The ladies in the 1950s were objecting to these pieces of glass. Actually, the ladies didn't wear comfortable shoes like those. The ladies often wore high, narrow, spiked heels, and they were slipping over these pieces of glass when they were wet, which was most of the time. And they also weren't used for anything commercially, so they just boarded up underneath and concreted over the top, and we lost a lot of these original skylights. But the good news is that many of these have been preserved, and you'll see what they look like on the next section when we get there. You have been so patient listening to me yak all this time, especially you kids. Thank you. Been so patient.
How old are these girders?
How old are they?
Yeah,
1972.
Yeah.
His room though didn't have a walkway. I offered to build it one. raining over there.
Yeah.
We've left the sidewalk and we've come inside of another building. Welcome to the Fry Meatpacking Plant. Here on your left, against the wall, is a good example of what the underground was used for during the 1920s and 30s. It was a common practice to dump construction waste down here to get rid of it. We've been rummaging through a lot of this over the last 30 years and found quite a few interesting artifacts. And you'll be able to see those at the end of the tour. Now, obviously, you're standing on a ramp right here. Just imagine where you're now standing is the level of where the floor was when this was a meat market. If you look behind you, you can see where the floor is now. The health officer in 1907 had these wooden floors concreted over to try to keep rats out of buildings. This is what happens when you put a concrete surface on top of mud and sawdust.
You think?
We're sinking about 1/8 of an inch a year as we speak. Let's get some fresh air.
Yeah.
Watch your step.
Thank you, sir.
What do you think, Ash?
All right, I'm moving.
School out there in Sharon, near Youngstown, Ohio, all the way west there. Stacy. I'll be back. I promise.
No, you're fine. Thank you.
Have a good tour.
Bye.
Please let me know if you have questions about all this. I tend to yak non-stop here, so just stop. I have a question. Just let me know.
I have a question.
Yes.
Who owns the property we're studying?
Good question. Did you hear that? Who owns all of this? We get asked that a lot. I kind of wish I did, but
It's Tacoma,
it's
isn't it?
it's all owned individually by the building owners. We as a tour group don't own a single brick down here. It's all owned individually by
thought
the
it
building
was
owners. They
too.
own the sections, under their buildings, and they also own access rights to the sidewalks adjacent to the buildings. In fact, they can develop this if they want to, and many of them have done just that. We have no say really as to what they can do. They have to leave the buildings, the fronts, pretty much as they were, but they can do whatever they want to pretty much inside the buildings. And we pay access rights to these areas, so that's why we have sort of exclusive rights to these 3 sections. Bill Spidell did all the preliminary work back in the 60s and paid them lots of money. That's what essentially got things going. We pay these building owners about $9,000 a month for the 3 sections. There you go. You notice this section is a little bit different. You notice the ceiling is a little bit lower. That's because we've literally gone downhill. As we head toward the west, toward the water, the elevation from the old to the new sidewalks diminishes. Fortunately, as we do that. We had an earthquake back about 5 years ago. It was a pretty big one. It was a 6.8 on the Richter scale. Fortunately, it was underground, way underground, and we didn't get as much damage as we could have, although many of the old brick buildings upstairs are still to this day being repaired and worked on because of that. We had to close the tour down for about a month and a half and kind of fix up some of the cracks and crevices that had been emerging over many years. If you look up here, you can see this is all the original brickwork. The flashlight just decided to die. Up here at the above you is the original brickwork, but in between the individual bricks, it's been all remortared there. So we feel the underground is a safer place now, theoretically.
So this is where the glass was?
Yes. What's that?
That's where the glass was?
No, we're not sure. We think this might be stairs. There were several stairs that were built to access these areas. In fact, the last section we go in, after you go upstairs from this section and then go down the last section, you'll be using stairs that were actually used by shoppers, you know, to access the underground. So it'll give you a visual on that, and we think this is probably what that was. You'll see skylights right up there at the corner. We're going to be going by the Northern Hotel and through by the Schwabacher Hardware Company. That was one of Seattle's first brick buildings on your left there. In the early 1870s, we had a tremendous amount of young single women moving into Seattle, mostly from California. And apparently they were self-conscious about what they really did for a living. So they called themselves seamstresses. In 1881, we had over 2,700 seamstresses, which seemed really strange for a logging town. And they all lived along the same 3-block section right here of Occidental Avenue, or First Avenue. All of a sudden, our new sawmill was no longer our leading industry. We had become the sewing center of the Pacific Northwest. You know, the guys who were running this town were in kind of a dilemma. You know, on the one hand, this constituted an illegal, immoral part of our town that ought to be run out. But on the other hand, these ladies provided an incredible amount of revenue for the city. People were arriving from all over Puget Sound to take care of their mending needs and spending their money on all kinds of other things. So the founding fathers agreed that the seamstresses should stay, and they taxed them. They initiated what we call the sewing machine use tax, SMUT. We didn't have very many sewing machines, but our sewing machine tax provided Seattle with over 87% of the city's total operating budget for 4 years. Left us with a very popular slogan you may have heard of: a stitch in time will cost you $2. Doesn't rhyme. But as you go through here, you'll see evidence of that. You'll see sewing machines leaning up against the wall right here. Let's go up to the corner. Here we go. The pioneers were very small in those days.
This is from the sidewalk glass.
07, that's when this was officially condemned. We're going to be standing right up here at the corner on this, the corner of the block, on the sidewalk up above, and on this skylight up here, and you'll get your bearings where you were, you know, underground. And also you'll notice the purple glass. These pieces of glass were nearly colorless when they were installed about 110 years ago. And over the years, the ultraviolet light passing through the glass. She was pretty. What was I talking about? Oh, the ultraviolet light would react chemically with the manganese they use in glass as a stabilizing agent and turn them purple. This is also designed to hold up a lot of weight. I think she's gone now, sir.
The image is still in his mind.
This is cast iron and is supposed to be very strong, but it doesn't always work. We had a Budweiser beer truck fall through one of our skylights about 8 years ago. They were making a beer delivery across the sidewalk in front of Doc Maynard's, and the truck fell right through the skylight. So we had to switch to Bud Light. You're all locked in, you have no choice. Now we're at the corner. The streets would be back here, of course, up on top of those stone walls. And the building is opposite you, right here in the corner. This was a little bank building. It was Henry Yesler's first attempt at brick after the fire. It was called the Scandinavian American Bank, and as you go through the opening around here to your left, around the corner, as soon as you go through the opening on the left, you'll see the old teller's cage where they transacted bank business, and beyond, you'll be going through an iron door into the vault of the bank. However, you're still going to be walking on the sidewalk. What's going on? Well, in the 1890s, something happened in 1896 to put Seattle permanently on the map. And this was gold, discovered up in Canada, up in the Yukon, up in the Klondike, along Rabbit Creek, and all of a sudden Seattle became a major merchandiser, and eventually, it took some time, but eventually we had a U.S. government assay office here, and the gold would come through Seattle, and much of it was stored in banks like this, and they were running out of space. And they thought, well, why not, since this area we call the underground is slowly being abandoned, why don't we just expand the vault right underneath the hollow sidewalk? And that's exactly what they did. On one side of the corridor, they built heavy stone walls right across the sidewalk. And on the other side, they installed iron doors. So we will be able to go through the iron doors into the vault. When you get in the vault, you'll see an old laundry tub hanging there on the wall. What's the laundry? Anyway, I'm going to tell you about the laundry tub because right next to the laundry tub on the left is the entrance into the bank from the vault there. Now we can walk right through the stone wall just like Harry Potter. We chiseled a hole through there. There's also people who think a lot and study kind of supernatural things, ghosts and things, say that this vault is a very active place. And it's interesting, the temperature in the vault always stays the same, no matter how hot or cold it gets anywhere else. And also there's a breeze that's continually blowing through the vault, and nobody knows why. Most of the guides think that's because it's haunted. But I think it's probably the bank drafts.
So this was a teller's cage.
To stand on it once you've seen it underground. And here's Henry Yesler's second floor entrance to his bank. He put all his money in the second floor because he knew this eventually would be the permanent first floor of the building, if that makes any sense. Excuse me. Let me sort of nudge by you if I could. Excuse me. Thank you. We're going to, this is our last little leg of the tour. And through this section, you'll notice that much of this has been devoted to things we found, you know, digging around over the years, like the old bathtub, 1903 copper bathtub here in the corner. And you'll notice on the walls there's these logs. The construction workers were digging around for the freeways back in 1965, and they unearthed about 70 of these logs that had been bored out from one end to the other, and we found our first water system. I think it was water. The sign on the log over there, the date is okay, but the sign isn't quite correct. It says Seattle's original water system. It should read Henry's Private Reserve. Just for Henry Yesler. Brought spring water down to Henry's mill and to his brewery. Some people didn't like that.
These are those
You know,
sidewalk
Henry
breaks,
having the
huh?
only decent water supply, so at night, if you had a good rifle and you had good aim, you could put a hole in one of those and create your own water system. And of course, they'd gather the water and ran home. This is where the term running water came from.
Yeah, I get it.
We gave some of these logs to museums and kept a few, and the rest we sold
Probably
to the
copper.
city of Tacoma. And they use these to upgrade their system today. So no, they're wonderful people. As we go through here, you'll see a bunch of historic artifacts. On both sides of this walkway, you'll see a preponderance of large machinery parts. On the right, it was once part of an electric elevator that was in this building, the Pioneer Building here at the corner. And there's the original first floor entrance you guys are standing in front of now. Let's go look. Here we go.
My God, look at the size of this stuff.
Turn you over to your own wanderings. What you do is you go through the opening here and turn right, and you'll be in a little museum. You can look at artifacts and photographs of old Seattle. Included is an original Crapper device. It's not connected to anything, but it's a joy to behold. Speaking of Crappers, we do have bathrooms. It's all the way to the back of the gift shop there. It's low tide. They're working. I don't know why they did this, but in order to get out of the underground, you have to go through the gift shop. And you can buy things there.
No kidding.
Useful things like gummy rats and plastic slugs, things you need.
Find underground.
Yeah, and you can also get out of here. There's stairs on the right side over there. That'll take you right up next to Doc Maynard's where you started the tour. If you want to buy the book that Joe was talking about upstairs, Sons of the Prophets, make sure you mention your tour guide's name at the cash register. That would be Bruce, okay? And you'll get a great discount if you do that.
Sure.
Also, there's a very popular exhibit over there on the counter as you leave. It's a jar there with a rat on the top of it. It's called the Tour Guide's Appreciation Fund. So if you're so inclined to tip your tour guide, don't fight the urge.
You guys want yours? Okay, bring it right in here. Hey, girl.
Go ahead. You can go.
That's all, folks.